The Mongolian ankylosaurs are rather confusing to keep up with for me. A lot of material is limited, with the validity of specimens questioned, accepted, and questioned again at different times by different experts. Saichania, however, does have pretty good remains and is one I'd always hoped to get. So it's nice to finally have at least one model of it, and what a shock, again, it's Haolonggood who provides it. The name Saichania means beautiful one, and originates from the Mongolian Saihan, meaning beautiful, and refers to how well the type specimen was preserved. Unfortunately, we essentially have only the front of the animal, as you can see here in the holotype MPC 100/151, but we do have the skull, all 7 cervicals, back vertebrae, some upper limb, 2 cervical rings, and delightfully some armor in situ. Saichania has been estimated to be 5 to 7 meters, or 16.4 to 23 feet long. This model is about 15 centimeters or 6 inches, which makes the scale 1 to 35 for a 5¼ meter or 17.2 foot individual. Now here's the Wonder Artistic Models humanoid to go with it. Again, there are 2 color variants. The one labeled green in some stores, but actually more accurately a grey. The mandatory browner looking one is very pleasantly more of a purple, and so it's not the boring run-of-the-mill colour you'd expect. Now both have streaks of colour running through in random natural ways, which is really nice. And then the osteoderms themselves, well, just one quick glance and you'll see they're not lazily painted. So let's take a closer look at the grey first. The skull, as you'd expect, is broad and full of the detail you'd expect from Haolonggood. From some angles, the snout does look like it tapers a little bit too much, though I should note that in Marianska's original illustration, it does have this look. Of specific interest in ankylosaurs will always be the Caputaguli. Now these are the tile-like ornamentations on ankylosaur skulls, and have been said to be characteristic and possibly diagnostic between different ankylosaurs. While many had rather flattish Caputaguli, an important characteristic in Saichania is their bulbosity. And you can see here on top of the snout the very strongly convex, even I would say round-tipped osteoderms. In our model today, we see that these are in fact rather raised, which is a nice nod to this character. However, while convex, you have to decide if it's sufficiently bulbous for you. I personally feel they could be more roundedly pointy, or if covered by keratin, at least more upraised. Besides bulbosity is how exacting you are about the form, the extent and the position of the Caputaguli. But there are differences even between specimens purported to be the same genus. Now here's the holotype MPC 100/151 and the referred specimen PIN 3142/250, which Arbor considers Saichania, but Marianska, Pankowski and Tumanova consider Tarchia. Most obviously, look at the squamosal horn. In the holotype, it's thicker and orientated posterolaterally. In the Arbor-referred specimen, it's more slender and directed more laterally. If they're different animals, then these could be differentiators. If they're the same animal, they're individual variations. One of those little things that contribute to whether one leans towards synonymy or splitting. For the squamosal horns, I'm glad that Haolonggood follows more the form of the holotype. It's just safer, I think. In other parts, the number and configurations of the nasal Caputaguli, the supranarial Caputaguli, even the extent and anterior coverage of the middle supraorbital Caputaguli also differs between the two. In general, I'd say that Haolonggood doesn't adhere to either, which you'll see most obviously in the composition of the smaller caputaguli, and also here where I might expect to see the larger nuchal caputaguli bridging the two squamosal horns. But I am grateful that some of the structure is respected, with a nod to the anterior and posterior supraorbitals. Now, some of you ankylosaur experts and enthusiasts, please comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And now going down, we get to the cervical half rings, another characteristic feature in ankylosaurs. Now, one thing I was hoping to see would be the expanse of interstitial osteoderms between the two medial osteoderms here. This is quite consistent in the few papers I've read about the holotype, so I would have hoped to see a wider gap between them, peppered with the kind of ossicular detail you'll see in the rest of the body. Sneak peek right here. They're instead rather medial, almost parasagittal, so they look evenly spaced. And likewise on the second cervical ring, which in Arber's reconstruction has an even wider gap. Now, given how pleasing the whole model is, it probably won't bother most people. But given how rare in situ dermal armor is, I prefer to see quirks like this captured in models. Now, moving down to the body, the overall reaction I have is one of awe, very similar to what I experienced when I first received the Sideshow Gastonia. First of all, the detail. Take it in, just take it all in. I hardly need to talk about the richness of color and the subtlety of fades. In the osteoderms, the transitions of color in the base to the skin, even the infusions of blue you'll see in some of these osteoderms all play a part to create a very special picture. You see these random streaks of color here. They break up the evenness of the back in a non-symmetrical, uncontrived way. They also happen here in the limbs, the face. The whole thing just looks real. Essentially, if you consider only the holotype valid, then we really don't know what the back part looks like. Still, we have referred specimens, and one of the best known is MPC 100/1305. It's a beautiful fossil, extensively described by Carpenter 2011, but considered by Arber to be Pinacosaurus sp. If you believe in some of these referred specimens, you could reference those, but personally, I feel that talking about accuracies based on referred material that's in contention would be talking out my hat. In any case, it's important to know that a lot of the back half and the tail club is going to be hypothetical. Now let's have a look at these scutes now. The armor is the eye-catching feature in any ankylosaur, but how well painted they are will heighten or depress the illusion of a real animal. And straight away, you see that this is chock full of detail. We have these larger osteoderms, and in varying sizes and shapes. We can see from Marianska's paper the great variety there are, and I think that Haolonggood has captured this diversity very nicely. Importantly, between these larger osteoderms are very tiny, very tightly packed ossicles, which is something we know from parts of Saichania. And I love that the idea is carried out throughout. And I wish we had the space up here between these two medial osteoderms to show this off. The whole arrangement is very intricate and exquisite in design. It's not just nice to look at, but it's also very tactile. In fact, with all these osteoderm morphologies, this small model really engages the senses, and it's a pleasure to hold and rub and other things you might care to do with it. Please don't put those in the comments, thank you. In the arm is another delightfully rendered area. The humerus is robust, very robust. This is admirably captured here, with a very broad humerus and looks almost squat in proportion. The ulnar radius area are covered with osteoderms as stated in Carpenter for 100/1305. The thickness of the short but very powerful thighs is equally impressive, with plenty of scale detail and hints of the underlying musculature. And of course down to those claws. Very nice. Now the tail. From the side, there's a slight upwards curve, which I'll probably heat up and straighten out at some point to account for a stiff handle. The whole tawny affair looks very natural, without any artificial symmetries or even as a design that sometimes make models a bit too picture perfect to be real. So much for the grey. Now then, the purple. As the same sculpt, you'll see that all the good in the other one is here as well. Haolonggood usually has two color variants, one of them being a warmer color along the lines of brown, but this one here, it's more of a purple. So I'll just give you a once-over of the model. There's a dark hue here in the neck and head that adds a little specialness to it. Just look at the infusion of color in these osteoderms. Just really can't get enough of it. The dry brushing here across the osteoderms breaks up what might be an expense of uniformity and gives it a keratinous flavor. Then these intermediary streaks of color we saw just now are also here, but more subtle. And once again, very nice detail. Just wonderful how it ties in together. I just love the patterning created by the fitting of these scutes. Now just look at that detail. Again, very nice here. I think you can see for yourself what a splendid model this is. So much for the purple. Alright, some comparisons. And as always, we'll first compare them to each other. And here you can see how the details look under each color. In most cases with two variants, I've always gravitated towards the non-brown one, or at least the cooler color. Here though, it was a really close fight. Perhaps what makes detail more obvious is what you prefer. Or you might prefer less obvious detail that's almost hidden. The way the other variant is done, far from the boring brown with stripes that plagues my collection, makes choosing a color not such a no-brainer here. Good news is that if you're not sure, whichever you get is still likely to make you very happy. In the end, I prefer the grey because of the very unusual treatment with all these osteoderms and the subtle infusions of blue. And next, we have the most recent Haolonggood ankylosaurid, the Euplocephalus, or the Scolosaurus if you will. An interesting choice for comparison is the Haolonggood Tianzhensaurus. Arbor has suggested that Tianzhensaurus was a junior synonym of Saichania, which means if you follow that idea, you have effectively two animals by Haolonggood who are Saichania. Here's another very thorny Asian ankylosaurid, the PNSO Pinacosaurus. In my PNSO Pinacosaurus review, I mentioned Saichania in passing, and it's nice to compare them. Similar features include the very robust arms and the forearm osteoderms. For another one, here's the PNSO Zool, and really I think I need to send him to someone to repaint him. I wasn't happy with the color, especially in the osteoderms, and here it just pales in comparison. Now here's another Chinese ankylosaurid, the Weitai Jinyun pelter. And of course, the mother of all ankylosaurids, here's the PNSO Ankylosaurus. Unfortunately, too big to scale perfectly. Now, a contemporaneous predator may have been Tarbosaurus, so here's the PNSO Tarbosaurus. And on Tyrannosaurids, here are our standard size comparators, the PNSO Wilson and the PNSO Cameron T-Rexes. Now this represents a smaller 5-meter individual, but yet it's harder to do in terms of how much finer the detail has to be. Yet basing this on a smaller estimate, and hence offering a smaller model, yet with all this incredible detail, it's something I really appreciate. It shows that Haolonggood has really come of age, and I look forward to smaller dinosaurs that have been given the pass, perhaps because of the standards of the time. I would love to see a Kentrosaurus, for example, or even a Polacanthus, preferably in green. I'll see you in the next video.